All right, we are going to finish with a really fantastic piece of music by a woman who deserves to be heard much more often. Her name is Dora Pejačević. She was a Croatian composer born in 1885. Her full name was the Countess Maria Teodora Paulina Pejačević. She came from a very wealthy family, in fact, a kind of royal family of the area. Her grandfather, I think, was one of the noblemen of that area in Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. Her mother was a countess from Budapest in Hungary, and she grew up in very privileged surroundings in an estate that was called Nasica in Croatia there. And it was basically this giant palace with acres and acres of beautifully landscaped nature around it. There was an artificial lake in the middle of that, the grounds, and in the middle of the lake was an island in the shape of a swan. And Dora used to hang out on that island and sort of while away the hours. She started playing piano when she was 6 years old. Her mother was a very good amateur piano player, but soon realized that her daughter was much better than she was. And so Dora was sent off to Dresden and Munich to learn piano. Again, she started composing on her own when she was 11 or 12, but she was not able to get any lessons in composing in Germany because women couldn't compose music. And so she had to learn on her own, like Amy Beach did, looking at other examples by composers and beginning to compose on her own. She was performed during her lifetime. Her music, she wrote a couple symphonies, which you can hear on YouTube. She wrote the first piano concerto by any Croatian composer that we know of, and several different chamber works. I recently performed a couple of years ago a cello sonata of hers. We did a piano quartet of hers last year. And this music was just finally printed a few years ago. It had been out of print for many, many years. So we're thankful that publishers are now getting this music out there so that we can actually perform it and then get it known by other people. But she was performed in places like Budapest, in Vienna, in Prague, in Munich, and people knew her name and knew the power of her music. But again, once she died, the music sort of died away, and I think maybe she's known in Croatia, but in very few other places. As far as we know, there are at least over 100 pieces of that she wrote. During World War I in 1914, she began to realize that she had grown up in really high position of privilege. She saw the horrors of the war. She actually stopped doing any music at the time and became a nurse to help people through it. And she became disturbed by what she saw of the aristocracy around her. And she wrote to a friend in 1917, "I simply cannot understand how people can live without working, and how many of them do it, especially the higher aristocracy. Many years ago, when we lived in Pest, I saw the way of life of the top 1,000, and I witnessed some awfully sad things. Most men and younger people didn't have any other aim in life but to play poker or bridge. Faced with the misery of this world, the likes of which there has never been, their thoughts remain exactly as they were before the war. They are only excited when they are threatened with the danger of losing part of their wealth. They weren't in the least upset about the most wretched and disgraceful acts of the war. They are devoid of all higher feelings, far from all big ideas, any kind of humanity, any social progress." Talking like this, you probably think I'm a socialist in your eyes, and I could scold a great deal more if I were not afraid of boring you or even making you angry. But the truth is that I can no longer continue to associate with the members of my own class. So she sort of divorced herself from that. I think her parents divorced her as well. She had to sort of make her way on her own. She was able to get some music done. And when she was 32, she finally got married to a military guy from Vienna, a much younger guy, not in her class, but got this marriage together. And then at age 36, very late for that time, she became pregnant with her first child. And there were lots of complications in the pregnancy, and about a month before the baby was born, she wrote this letter to her husband, I think with the premonition that things were not going to go well. She said, "I hope that our child will be a joy to you, that it should become a true, open, and great human being. Prepare its ways for it, but never prevent it from knowing in life the suffering that ennobles the soul, because only in that way can one become a rounded human being. Let it develop like a plant, and if it has some great talent, give it everything to encourage this talent. Above all, give it freedom when it seeks it, because a great deal of gifts can be lost through dependence on parents and relatives. I know this from my own experience. Also, you must act the same way if it is a boy or a girl. Every talent, every genius requires equal consideration, and the child's gender cannot be allowed to come into the matter. She did have a son, Theo. 4 weeks after his birth, she would die of complications of the pregnancy at age 37, so we don't have nearly as much music as we would have. But a remarkable life. When she died, she did not want to be buried in the family crypt, the big mausoleum they had. She instead got a very simple grave with just the name Dora, no last name on it, and underneath it says, "Rest now." One last quote by Dora about the act of composing. Much like velour, there's something powerful about it for her. She said, "When I am floating off into this invisible world of my most personal and inner thoughts, only then do I become my real self. And then in that heavenly, distant seclusion of the feelings, which is in itself some kind of ecstasy, comes a sense of liberation of a type that is only realized when a composition is created. And that is how I answer people who ask me, 'What are you really doing when you are composing?' But who would understand such an answer? It always seems to me that I betray my own soul when I reply to this pointless question like some average realistic person should do. Sometimes I just say, 'It's so hard to explain,' which is perhaps the best answer." So I think a remarkable woman. I think there's a movie coming out shortly called Countess Dora about her life, which would be fascinating. She knew some important people like Rilke and others at her time. This is a piece that is written in 1910, which is a great time in the history of music. Tonality is being pushed. There's lots of chromatic movements, impressionism in there. She really takes all of these new styles in, sometimes pushing it really to the boundary of atonality, where you're not quite sure where the music is going, but it always sort of comes together in a wonderful way. There's 4 movements. The first movement starts with this luscious violin solo, then the cello gets a little solo, and then there's some wonderful dialogue in that, a very exciting conclusion. Then there's the second and third movements, which often are kind of throwaway movements, and most composers focus on the first and the last. But she does a remarkable job in these middle movements. The second movement is a scherzo with this wonderful pizzicato folk-like tune. It could be a Croatian folk song, I don't know, in the beginning. Then there's a beautiful trio section, and we go back to that scherzo. Then there's the third movement, which is one of the most luscious slow movements in all of the literature. Very chromatic, wandering. There are moments in this where you feel like you've stumbled into a Puccini grand opera, and it just sort of opens up with this great aria. There's other other times where the music suddenly gets fast out of nowhere, which you don't usually get in slow movements, but it all somehow comes together in this wonderful way, very soothing movement. And then the last movement is much more energetic, with this kind of dotted military kind of rhythm to take us home in a great ending. So we hope you will go study a little bit on Dora Pejačević. Please welcome back to the stage Emanuel Borewski and Cecilia Weiser.